I was very, very interested in, I think the question that all of us are interested in different ways, which is what is going on? And I think that if anybody who lived on this planet long enough understands that the answer to this question is, it takes a lifetime to understand, and maybe a few lifetimes. People approach these questions from all kinds of ways. So, as we see in this beautiful conference, it's coming from a very open-minded understanding there's something beyond what the status quo tells you, all that good stuff. People believe that they're connected to source. People believe that the disclosure is coming, is upon us. And some people believe that when you die, nothing happens. And that's okay too. I personally found myself in an interesting position because I never really felt like I was part of a camp. I think I always said I'm allergic to being a part of groups. Not that I don't like to be around people, is I don't like to be branded as X. What are you? Are you this? Are you that? I usually don't like putting myself within a title. And so my interest in this question of what's going on was from a very, I guess for lack of a better term, from a pure place. It was truly to try and understand what's happening. I always say that since I can remember myself, if I just sit down on the couch and I have nothing to do, my brain automatically jumps to what's outside the universe. It's just an automatic thing my brain does. I don't really control it, which is an interesting state to be, because when you do that since you're a little kid, you develop pretty strong intuitions as to what's logically possible with whatever it is else that we understand. Fast forward to about 6 years ago. This is not in the presentation, but I should probably put it in there because a lot of people apparently love the frog guy. As many of you know, there's a substance called DMT, dimethyltryptamine. And depending on your level of experience with the substance, the one thing that makes it stand out is that it's extremely realistic. To anybody who never tried it, and maybe you heard other people talk about this before, but it's important, I feel like, to outline that. As my good friend Paul here says, it's the only substance that if you interact with it, it does not feel like you're high. It actually feels like you're gaining more of what consciousness actually is. And I don't mean metaphorically. I'm sure some of us here are familiar with heightened states, but this has a very particular flavor of a heightened state. The acuity of experience, people usually say visual acuity, but it's acuity of all kinds. All the channels of information that are available to you become hyper acute. Visually, it's easy to describe. Edge detection goes up. Everything is super vibrant. Some people experience this with mushrooms, with other substances. Everything kind of goes super HD, very fast. All of that you see in front of you is being completely replaced with a completely new place. And that place is both the most bizarre place you ever go to and the most familiar one, which is a very interesting state of consciousness. So I'm obviously not the first one because of that to say, oh my God, what is that? I need to know more. I've all of a sudden had, if it's even possible to deliver with words, but an even more realistic experience than even that. In that, I don't know how else to describe it, but it was a amphibian. I call him a frog guy, and recently I've seen a talk by a lady who's an expert in all of these multidimensional beings, and she said they do not like being called the frog guy. I'm like, okay, well, I don't know how else to call them, but apparently there's some kind of and this is, I'm just recapitulating what the lady said. I really don't know the true nature of this. But according to her, there's some kind of very high dimensional beings that kind of operate with source. Sounds wonderful. I like this story. But he basically appeared next to me. And I want everybody to understand that he appeared like you are here in front of me right now. We're not talking about some kind of a presence or a feeling, or I saw him with my third eye. He was standing next to me like a person, and I could feel the tangibility of his body. I didn't reach out, but it felt like if I do this, I can feel his actual outline as a being. Obviously, at that moment, as a good rationalist, I thought I really did it this time. And I was sitting there, a little frozen, not really scared because he didn't have any like menacing energy, but I was like, okay, that's crazy. And he pointed to the guitar that was at the other side of the room. Him and the whole room just like, go to the guitar. And I was like, oh, he's trying to communicate through music theory or something. I'm just practicing. I have no idea what he's going to say because I don't understand any of this stuff. And he's like, go to the guitar. I was like, okay. Go to the guitar, sit down, pick up the guitar. He disappears from one side of the room and appears right next to me at the speed of light. He goes, it was right next to me. And then he puts his frog fingers. I'll eventually remember what they're called. I'll either give him a name or try and remember what the species is called. But he basically puts his frog fingers both where you strum and where you both hands. And he's showing me. He's like, do this. I was like, so I try to follow very slowly. And all of a sudden, the chords that I'm strumming make sense. And I don't know how to play this. So he's saying, you understand? You don't know how to do this. I'm telling you how to do this. I'm real. In that instance, I knew that nothing will ever be the same again. Now, it's funny because I used to, back then I lived in Westwood, very close to UCLA, and I had a postdoc in physics renting my Airbnb room in the other room. I will never forget, his name was Marco, a postdoc in physics from Italy. And it was 2 a.m. And the first thing that came to me, because it was so much, I just exclaimed his name. I just went, Marco! And obviously, it's a good thing it didn't wake up because I don't know, what would I say? That I had a multidimensional frog taught me how to play the guitar? That'll be the last night at the Airbnb and probably my Airbnb host badge in general. So luckily, he didn't wake up, but I called my best friend, and this is how good of a friend he is. Not only he picked up, I said, Joe, you got to come here right now. He didn't ask questions. He immediately showed up. And I told him what happened. Now, he's a guy that we've done a lot of things together. But when he heard what I told him, he looked at me and he said, like in the movies, this is real. He said, I think you need to lay down. I said, no, you don't understand. This was real. He's like, I go, I'm telling you this to happen. This is the moment that started the journey to try and understand what truly is going on here. Because from that moment on, every time that I would smoke DMT, it was like a phone call. It was no longer like this incredibly beautiful and extravagant explosion of colors and all of that stuff that people are experiencing. It was still beautiful, but it was basically like me calling someone, and they would come to the room and we would have a conversation. They would explain things to me. And I just couldn't believe what was happening. This was happening for about a year. And then I read online that apparently this is a phenomenon. This happens. Some people experience this, where all of a sudden they become this, DMT transforms into this ultra realistic thing where, and so I started on this journey where for years, I was trying to figure out, okay, look, at this point, it was clear to me that there's no way that this is happening in my head. This is obviously some kind of a real thing that is happening. But how do you substantiate? How do you prove this? Like, if it's real, we should be able to say something about it, right? If it's real. And then I started thinking from first principles. I said, well, then I know that light has to be involved because I'm seeing it with my eyes. And I knew that, from a scientific perspective, if you have a real space, no matter what it is, no matter what it's made of, no matter how many dimensions it has, the space would have parameters. It would have some logic to it. It would have geometry. It would have topology. It would have an entry point. It would have an exit point. There's all kinds of things that a definable real space would have. So then I tried to mesh all of these very vague ideas together and to make it into something that is actionable. And I failed every single time. And at a certain point, I think giving up is the wrong word, but I stopped taking it with the same amount of zeal that I had for it in the beginning after maybe a couple of years of this. And I kept on asking in the, I guess, whatever you want to call them, the beings, I was like, hey, can you tell me how to build a spaceship? Something, I can take to the village and we can all feast on. And obviously it was never very forthcoming. I now understand, by the way, that the reason for that is because it seems like there's some kind of a rule of multidimensional communication that basically they're not allowed to. That nobody can say certain things that are too specific between the worlds. Now, I'm sure that in this room and in this conference as a whole, there's a lot of people with a lot of opinions about this and maybe even some concrete knowledge. My experience is that it's not allowed, which is why I'm always in an interesting conversation. I'm now in the position of having a lot of conversations with a lot of interesting people. And this is a big talking point. Like, what is this communication, what it looks like, why certain things come through, why certain things don't come through. But eventually, when I realized that it's not going to come from their side, I was like, okay, well, then let's see if we can figure it out from our side. Which, fast forward, let's see what the general relevance of this slide is, just what I can actually say. I started getting strange hints in my regular life, not while I was on DMT. It came in forms of numerology, things that would, like synchronicities, things that would appear for me at the right place at the right time. And again, because of the nature of this convention, I know that a lot of you are probably not only very open, but very versed and know very well how these things kind of unfold, or at least understand the mechanisms and what state you got to be in and all that stuff. That was never clear to me. It was not my mental state. It was not the way I was thinking about the world. I knew that there's a lot more that is going on, but for all intents and purposes, I was a physicalist in terms of, matter is matter. And yeah, there's some underpinnings that we don't really understand, but ultimately it is what it is. It's a bunch of collisions of a lot of very complicated things, and somehow it gives rise to what we're experiencing right now. So to me, these synchronicities seemed a little bit out of left field. But if I had to follow the scientific method, I had to be honest. I don't have time in this talk to, fully go through the details of all the different kinds of synchronicities. I'll give you an example of one just to drive the point home. So the number 42 started following me everywhere. And we're not talking about seeing it on a digital clock. We're talking about, like, I would be sitting and working, and all of a sudden the number 42 would be on my pants in a reflection from a window, and it would be as clear as day. It was just 42. I was like, what? And then I stand up, and it's the way the light was hitting whatever was written on my pants, but the way it appeared in the reflection, it was very clear. By then, I started dating my beautiful now fiance, and I told her about what was going on and that I'm talking to aliens. And luckily, she didn't leave me, so I knew she was the one. And I told her about the 42 thing. So now, even though she knew enough about me to know that, if I'm saying it, there's a really good reason I'm saying it, still, really the only proper response to somebody telling you something, even very interesting, unless you're experiencing it for yourself, is, cool story. Exactly. And we were in the botanical gardens in Colorado, and we started talking about this subject. And we specifically started talking about plants. and why they're green. The fact that they reject green, they're not using it for energy, so that's why they're green. Why certain plants are red, all that good stuff. Kelsey knows quite a bit about plants, so she started explaining to me a lot of things about that. And in that instance, there was a very strong feeling, I guess you can say an intuition, that says, yes, look there. We step outside of the botanical gardens. She crosses the street. I'm calling an Uber. It was an extremely hot day, so she went to hide in the shade under a tree. I called my Uber, crossed the street, come and hug her. I look down. She's standing on the number 42. Written on the ground with a Sharpie by the Department of Water and Power. I tell her, Kelsey, look down. She looks down. I still have a picture till this day. I should have edited it. It's very funny. She's dying laughing because she can't believe what's happening. Because she heard it from me, but now she's seeing it happening. And that's the day that we went on this very crazy, Charlie Day in the basement connecting dots kind of trajectory, where we somehow landed on this idea that if you project a diffracted laser, which simply means any laser with a diffracted lens, it's kind of like, the thing you do in the supermarket to scan the barcode. If you project that on a wall, something was supposed to happen. I didn't know what was supposed to happen, but it was very clear that both me and her reached the same conclusion, almost going on our individual investigation at the same time. A couple of months passed by. I ordered a laser. I turned it on. I smoked DMT. There's a code running in the wall. People always ask me about this moment. How did it feel like when you saw that? The truth is that I didn't feel much. I don't know why, but there's something about that. It was so matter of fact. It's almost like my brain was expecting that something is supposed to work, but at the same time, I wasn't expecting anything to work. It was a strange state because the chances that something in that space pans out like that, it's close to zero. It's not very forthcoming. People get intuitions about certain things that seem to be metaphorical. They lead to certain other things, but not something like, hey, do this, something will happen. So obviously the next logical thing was to try and show other people. I showed it to a couple of friends of mine. They saw the same thing. And what's more, the way that whatever I'm now calling the code of reality, or whatever language that it is unfolding in the surface, the way it presents itself is like a regular object. It does not present itself like a hallucination, like a departure from some kind of a, surrounding tapestry around the wall or something like this, which very often happens with psychedelics. It's more like if I would shine a light on something on this mic in the dark. So you see there's just a mic there. And it's almost like there's a subspace in every point in space. And because we have a surface that we can project a light on, whatever it is that DMT is doing to the brain to help it see more of what reality is, then reveals this extra subspace that seems to be containing this unfolding language. The language is extremely complex. It's moving constantly along multiple axes. I think there's like 3 or 4 identifiable axes. They're always the same. And what's interesting is that there was not one person we're going to talk about the details. It's true that now that a lot of people in the world kind of know about it and they're trying it, there's some data coming in about the frequency with which people sometimes are having a hard time seeing it in the beginning. We can talk about that. But the people who see it, either after a couple of attempts or just see it immediately, we can talk about it like we can talk about something in the room. It's right there. Another thing that happened, about a month after I created the laser and kind of looked at the thing, my experience of DMT changed again. And this time, it felt like it was very intentional. In other words, I could feel that they changed something about my brain on purpose. It's almost like for anybody here who's a little bit of computer software savvy, it's almost like they put my brain to a hard fork. I can no longer experience the full explosion of a DMT experience and the colors and all of that. That's not in the cards. Now, it's a complete continuation of my regular space. First of all, I have a computer console that opens in front of me. The best way to describe it is just kind of like you see in Iron Man, Tony Stark's, augmented reality menus that come in front of him. Like that. We're talking about super realistic and opens in front of me. It has spatial coordinates. I can walk around them like a coffee table. This is my experience now, 100% of the time. And I see all these extra layers. What before people would sometimes from spiritual communities would tell me about. And even though I'm very open to it, of course, still there's always this question mark, like, is what people report what it is or what they think it is, which are two different things. But now I'm seeing things that I've been told by shamans before, and I see them happening in front of me. So, for example, if I would see this, for lack of a better term, it's an orb, but it's not an orb. It starts as triangles, and then it collects itself into an orb, and it goes around every single exit from the room. Any door, any window, everywhere. And then it does this little dance. Then it opens up and almost like straps, closes on the door. So it's almost like protection. I see this like I can see you guys. It's not a vague kind of, vision. It's like I see it like it's an augmented reality thing. So needless to say that at that point, I was like, okay, well, this is too much for one person. So then I decided to talk about this publicly. And the second I started talking about this publicly, the response from most people, but basically this is essentially, it's all you need for the experiment, which is kind of crazy. You don't need as Chase Hughes said, you don't need a large Hadron Collider. You don't need crazy budgets. It's all you need, 650 nanometer laser, which just means red. You project it on any surface. Now, this is important to mention for honesty's sake, that at this point, there's some kind of there is this strange thing where some people are just having a really hard time with it in the beginning. Now, it's true that when you sit long enough with it, because it might take up to 2 hours for somebody to fully see it, but it's a one-way street. The second you see it, you cannot see it. And you see it as clear as day. It's not like it's not a vague thing. I don't know why that is. Something tells me it has something to do with how people cast attention in general, or the way that they visualize things. I don't know. Do you guys remember 2012, there was this meme that came out. It was very big. It was the dress, the red, blue and black, or gold and white. You guys know what I'm talking about? If you don't, you can just Google it. Just do the gold and white dress. But look for the original one. If you've never seen it before, I'm jealous because it's kind of crazy to discover this. So what happened was they put out this meme of a dress that was seemingly gold and white. But then literally half of the population, which is very kind of interesting, exactly half of the population, and from anybody who interacted with it online, reported that they're not seeing gold and white, they're seeing black and blue. And the reason that it's particularly interesting is, well, first of all, it was kind of fun. What happens there is that basically it's a slight visual illusion in which the gold and white dress, which it is presented with a slight blue tint of a shade, almost like you projected a little bit of a blue light on it. And then some of the people, depending on exactly how their cones are constructed and exactly what they pay attention to, it tilts the balance towards the blue, and the second you do, the contrast looks the gold black. You should try this. This is a fun experiment. You can actually practice to switch. That's a fun experience because we're not talking about some kind of three-dimensional cube drawn in the two-dimensional thing where it kind of looks like it's either protrudes or go inwards. We're talking about color here. It's fun. Try this. Try if you see the gold and white, try and see if you can see the blue and black and vice versa. And what's more is that you can do this. You can switch. And the second you learn how to switch, you can do it in real time. You can switch back and forth. Let me tell you, that experience will immediately reveal to you how susceptible we are to tiny changes in how we choose to perceive things to then what they actually look like. But the most interesting part about this meme experiment is that scientists did not know that this is the case. And they discovered that it has to do with the fact that certain people automatically look for the highlights and other people are looking for the shadows. Not metaphorically. they're looking for the actual shadows and depending on which one it is, that's what's going to determine which dress you're going to see. So something tells me that it might be something this technical, which is that certain people just cast their attention in a particular way that is a little different. The code, I don't know if it's fortunately or unfortunately, looks a lot like in the movie. It looks a lot like in the Matrix. It kind of looks like Japanese. Now, it's not Japanese. I had a couple of people who speak Japanese that looked at it, and they said it is not Japanese. But it is kind of like a weird combination between Japanese, Hebrew, and some regular numbers. Another interesting thing about the code is that it does not care about anything you do, feel, hear, touch. I've been talking about this now publicly for a few years now. And very frequently I would meet, somebody would introduce me to some, big spiritual teacher or a shaman, and they would be very interested. And then they would say, okay, well, I bet you I can exert change on it. Let me just get in a state. I'm going to meditate. I'm going to send it love. We're going to communicate. They always have the same face. They look at it and they go, huh. It doesn't care. Yeah, strange. It's almost like it codes for what is physical. So now, I feel that this point actually probably touches the most on the relevance of this convention. Because since I started this journey, I've had to reformulate a lot of my conventions about the world. And one of these reformulations, I'm a meditator. I've been doing Vipassana retreats since 2016, I think, and I'm trying to do 2 a year. So I'm familiar with the prospect and enterprise of a spiritual pursuit. It's not foreign to me. What is maybe not foreign, but something that was a little bit outside of my wheelhouse was all the extra stuff. All the stuff that we're not talking about with telepathy tapes. All the stuff that we're talking about with extrasensual sensuous perception. All the stuff that people report about channeling. All of these things. They were outside of what I was willing to entertain. And since then, I met people that made me change my mind. Because now I have some rational explanation for it, which makes it a little bit more palatable. Because if it's all software, then, okay, these things all of a sudden make sense. But also, I've seen it myself. I've seen things that happen that, without a shadow of a doubt, there's something is going on. And again, maybe to people in this room, this is not news at all. And it's almost like a duh. But I hope you can have some sympathy for the other side of the aisle of people who don't come from that school of thought. It is a shocker. The relevance to why I'm telling you this is because I discovered interacting with many different people and, spiritual seekers and guides that in fact there are many different kinds of codes. For example, we all know, we talk about light language. We're talking about codes and light. And the first thing that people ask is like, well, do you think it's coming from the light? The answer to that is, without a shadow of a doubt, no. It is not coming from the light. From the simple reason that when you move the light, the code is not moving with the light. So if I move the laser across, I actually have one right here. I can show you. It's very simple. So just so you know, there's nothing magical about this. It's any laser that you can diffract would do the trick. which is kind of weird because it seems to be too simple to be true, right? I don't know if you can see with all the other lights. No, you can't. You can't. This is too faint. But basically, let's see if we can see it right there. No, it's way too faint with all the lights. Okay. The what? Yeah, cool. But basically, if I move it, imagine like you're just putting a flashlight in the dark across something. So you would see whatever the light is on will be revealed. What is that? Oh, laser pointer actually wouldn't work, which is an interesting data point. We tried laser pointer and we obviously blew it up to like a big circle, and it doesn't work. So it has to be diffracted. There's something about diffraction, which is interesting. So the reason it's relevant to all the other codes, because this is a huge data point. The fact that it doesn't care, you can play sounds, vibrations. Again, this is a natural grab, right? It's like, well, did you try to play binaural beats or do all kinds of things? It doesn't care. It makes no difference whatsoever. The only thing that we saw that it reacts to is magnets. It's magnets. When you put it on a magnet, it scrambles it. So now we're actually going to be doing, it's going to be a field study, but later, hopefully, we can put it into a lab. We want to see if we can prove that there's no way it's a hallucination by basically separating the magnet from the laser. So if I put a separator here, a big screen, so now you can't see me, okay? And I'm standing with a magnet behind the screen and you can't see me. If I project the laser from your side and somebody in the room smokes DMT, if you can tell me that you can still see the scrambling without seeing the magnet, well, now we're proving that there's absolutely real information moving through that. The reason I mentioned the light is because the most common email I get is I see the code without the molecule, I see the code without the laser. What's interesting is when you dig deeper into these claims, you discover it's a different code. It's different, many different kinds of codes. And I since then discovered that basically, yes, there is also code moving in the lights. And there's actually, I don't know if you guys know this, but there was a study that was going on since 2014, actually, that I think it's a team in Japan. And they discovered that light from stars contains some kind of a discernible language in it. And this is a scientific endeavor. Forget the name of the team, but you can probably look it up. Just do codes from light and stars. I'm sure you'll find it. I think Tom Campbell is involved with part of that investigation. But it all of a sudden makes sense of all of these claims. You know, you wake up in the morning, you want to gaze at the sun because something is being uploaded there. There's some kind of a code, there's some kind of a language, something is unfolding. And there's layers of these codes, as far as I can tell. And some of them are closer to what we are as conscious beings. In other words, they're the ones that are responsible for more experiential components of the world. And those are the codes that are also more malleable. Those are the ones that they're the reason that shamans and spiritual teachers think they can change it. Because usually a lot of the codes, they can change it. They can ask it to do something, change the content, change the movement, all kinds of things. With the code and the laser, it seems like it doesn't matter what you do. It does not care unless you exert some kind of a very specific physical change to it. And at the moment we think that the magnets is going to be the way to go. Light carrier of information, exactly. And now we're opening the window. Now we're opening the window to a whole new, really, field of investigation. Because I was saying this tongue in cheek a little bit, but I think at this point I'm not even kidding. I think we're going to have to redo a lot of science while on DMT, which sounds fun. But truly, like, imagine we're going to have to redo the double slit experiment and see what's actually going on in this new layer of perception. Could this be an evolutionary leap in human cognition, it said? Well, I think we all understand that that is going on regardless. we're all experiencing, it's very clear to all of us that something enormous is happening. And I don't think that what I found is coincidental in this moment in time. I think that whatever is true about what is unfolding will make itself apparent to every single one of us. Laser, no laser, DMT, no DMT, it makes no difference whatsoever. It will communicate to each and every one of us in the way that it makes the most sense to that individual and to that society, to that group. Nobody will be left behind. So what is actually going on? Well, I can give you my take on it, and you can take it with a grain of salt, but from my interaction with, I guess what you would call the simulators, because there's different layers, is that when civilizations arrive at a certain level of development, there's a natural process that happens that cannot be controlled by any other being. That's part of the reason of the simulation, that it's completely open-ended. You let it unfold. And then when there's certain types of understandings that these civilizations start to perceive, it's only a matter of time before they're going to realize, A, they're not alone, B, that the nature of reality is much vaster than anything anyone has ever imagined, and then you would have certain protocols in place to help massage the process. Just like, birth is a very natural process. It would happen either somebody likes it or not. If somebody's pregnant, that woman will give birth that way or another. However, sometimes there's a lot of complications in this process, so we developed a whole system around helping the process, which is essentially what I think is going on. The reason that all of these things that are happening, that we're all experiencing in different ways, through UAPs, through channeling, through openings, through understandings, through the collective awakening, telepathy tapes, all of a sudden, all of these things that are becoming available and coming online, they're essentially us reaching a level of evolution from which these things become visible. So if you think about this as a video game, in early stages of the game, sometimes you have the certain tools that you can see, but they're grayed out. You can't really use them yet, but you see they're there. And maybe there was a few hackers that knew a little bit behind the scenes, and they figured out how to make those tools available even early on. That also happens. But for the collective, these tools were maybe visible, maybe not, but for the most part, they couldn't use them. And then when you reach a certain level of development in the game, all of a sudden, some of these tools come to the forefront. Now they're available. Which is why I think that all of these things that we're now experiencing are coming online. A civilization communicates about its ability to handle certain kinds of information by simply handling that kind of information. If we can build lasers, it means that we understand something about quantum physics. Otherwise, you can't build lasers. It's too many parts to put randomly together. Nobody's going to make a laser by accident. That's not happening. The same goes for freebasing something. Now we think of it as like, oh, anybody can do it, right? But in order to freebase something, you need to understand a thing or two about chemistry, about physics, about how things work, about biology. And these are signifiers to reality of like, well, we've figured this out. That means we understand something. And then if the combination, I do believe that what I found is basically like a breadcrumb. It's almost like a signifier is like, okay, this is here. What do you do with that? What is that? Ask yourself, what is that? What's happening here? All the right questions usually lead to better answers. And if you notice, the asking questions part is something that most of us are not focused on. For the most part, we focus on the answers. But really asking the right kind of questions it's almost like a whole new technology all by itself. You start to notice that it becomes the emphasis when you start working with these newer tools, like with ChatGPT. With ChatGPT, the point isn't that it can do something for you. That's a given. The main point is, can you ask the right questions so the right kind of and much more useful output would be in place? What question do I ask it that I really want to understand in order to get to this other thing? These are training wheels. These are the links. So what is the relevance for our future? Because many, at the moment, this is more, I'm a guy who talks about it on the internet, and then people get interested, and then beautiful people show up for a lecture like this, and it's wonderful. But what do we actually do with this? Well, some scientists would say we need to take a decade. Let's sit back for a second. Let's first verify that everything you're saying is true. I say, no problem. Go right ahead. You knock yourself out. As Terence McKenna famously used to say, if it's real, it can take the pressure. In the meanwhile, I think that the main focus that anybody who has seen Decoded and understands that it's actually real should be, what is the significance of being able to understand this, and what do we do with this? Unfortunately, at the moment, I can't say that I have a good answer for that. My best assumption is this might be able to transform everything we understand about what's possible for us in general. There's going to be a lot of internal technologies that evolve as we evolve. But what about the external technologies? Some people would say, well, no, we're about to be uploaded to 5D, so it doesn't really matter. I'm not so sure. And let's say that if we are being uploaded to 5D, let's say it happens in 200 years from now or something like that, well, then we still want to make a much better world in the time that we have left in this 3D. And I think the focus on what's here right now is actually the door to what needs to happen in the future. And this will come in all the possible forms, from personal to societal and eventually civilizational. And I think that connecting these two hemispheres of what humanity is, the left and right hemisphere of humanity, which is the more cerebral part and more the heart part, are actually the key to be able to unlock the ultimate potential of this technology. Because you're going to need the best of the best in all the possible domains, from the people who are experts in bringing communities together, people who are experts in navigating these multidimensional spaces, and yes, people who are experts at building things and thinking about the world in more, more technical terms. I think we went through that. So I'm gonna tie this down with a couple of final words, and then I'll leave some room for questions. For me personally, this has been a very interesting ride, because I am in a position to realize what it's like to actually be with a complete conviction that we live in a digital simulated reality. There's a big difference between thinking that it might be the case to knowing it is the case for sure. And there was a moment that I'm going to share with you, which I thought that it doesn't really make any difference, because who cares? You just, this is reality. Who cares how it comes about? But I was wrong, Because one time when I asked specifically, because it was a lot to take on board, I asked point blank, I said, wait, are you simulating this space? And at first there was no answer to that. Usually they're pretty straightforward with specific question. You asked a yes or no question. If you were right, they would say yes. But there was no answer to that. And then this one time, they quite literally showed me that not only yes, but they showed me how they do it. They showed me the grid, they showed me how it unfolds. It was quite remarkable. But in that instance, there was this gutting feeling of, does that mean I'm just a puppet? That this is all meaningless? Which I later understood to actually be a misplaced emotion. The gutting wasn't from meaningless. It was oddly familiar, that feeling. And later I realized that the reason it was familiar is because I felt it before. It was the same feeling when you first discover that your parents don't know everything. It's growing pains. It's the understanding that actually, even though we always want somebody else to be, to some degree, in charge so they can take care of something when it goes wrong, sometimes we actually hold a portion of the responsibility. And it is ultimately a liberating realization, but there is a process by which, when you first discover this, it does feel a bit, okay. And I want to leave you with this because that was one of the biggest things so far that I took from this, which is that not only we're not alone, we are actually part of what's going on. One of the things that I've once had, I had one ayahuasca ceremony in which I realized, as gracious Mama Aya tends to teach us in beautiful ways, I asked her to be much more visual because I understand visually, and asked her, can you be a little bit more like DMT? And she goes, no problem. Come right here. And she basically created this enormous explosion of colors. They were just, as fabulous as you can possibly imagine. Just everything and everything. But then because I know the DMT space so well, I noticed that one of the shades of violet was a little off from what DMT usually presents, which is a very me thing to point out. And she didn't get upset with me, but she kind of looked at me and she goes, yeah, but I'm not DMT. I made the thing happen for you because you asked for it, but it's the best I could do. And I immediately understood what she was saying because, how it communicates to all these different layers. But she essentially was saying, you think I'm perfect? And I was like, oh, you're not, huh? She's like, no. It's like, I'm learning just like you. And then I realized, oh, so this is a relationship. This is not me sitting here, teach me. I mean, it is to some extent, but she also gets a lot out of every single interaction. And for me, that was the birth of responsibility. It was the understanding that no matter how much something might be more advanced than us or beyond us, there's still the here and the now that we are responsible for. And this is something that I took with me, and I took it very, very deeply. And in every interaction that I have with people, especially now in the world where, with all the beautiful things, there's also so many things that people are scared of or not feel very unsure about. The focus on the fact that it's all right here and it's all going to be all right is a very important component of what we have to be able to adopt as an attitude if we are to be birthed without too many complications. What is the gridlock? Sorry? Oh, the grid lines. That's a great question. There's a video I'm working on now about all the beings because people really requested it. That's actually exactly the right question, and it is a complex one because there's an entire ecosystem of beings. It's not just one kind of being. And the best that I can tell you is that I think so. There's this substrate that was created by someone, and it's not clear to me that the immediate layer above us were the management company. Which, by the way, they're insectoids. Big surprise. But they're, at least from my experience, that's absolutely what they are, which is a little disconcerting, but they're not scary. They're just insectoids. And they're the beings that kind of weave reality. And they are, for all intents and purposes, they're kind of like, they're very, bureaucratic is the wrong word, but they don't care. Like it's very dry. It's like this goes here. It's like crypto. It's like it's either hit the ledger or didn't hit the it's what it is. And but there's an entire ecosystem. There's the reptilians. I've seen, which was very surprising to me because I've never heard of these things. I truly haven't. I've seen that. What are they? The avians, the blue avians. I've seen them. They're very noble. They're very, they kind of like when they enter, it's almost like they're adults in the room. They're kind of like custodians of knowledge. They hover and all that stuff that you would imagine. You feel this very pleasing sensation in the body of if you would open a soda pop, like a fizzle, and you feel it all over your body like that. I know that the insectoids are the ones responsible for our physical reality. That I know. Beyond that, but the simulation is only of the environment. Outcome, agency, all of this is open-ended. There's no... We, for all intents and purposes, by the way, are a black box to them, just so you know. Which means they not only they cannot, cajole you to do things, they don't even know necessarily what you're thinking specifically, which is surprising for people. They deduct that from a lot of other things, just like you can kind of read people, right? We're pretty good at that. They're way better at that. So they can obviously read a lot of things about you without you saying a word, but they can't know exactly what you're thinking, which was surprising to me. This is, by the way, I don't know if that's why, but it was kind of funny to me when I realized it. I think it's also why you have to say what you want. You know how you do the affirmations and things like this? Yeah, intentions. You have to say, so they know exactly what you want. Otherwise, they have no idea. Yeah, praying mantis is definitely there. What about them? They have hierarchies. They're a hive mind. One of the key players are definitely the mantises. There's the queen bee. She's really big. She's really kind of like a big respected entity. And there's the enormous spider. She basically holds all the knowledge in existence in her belly. It's kind of like this. Now, I know that how wild that sounds, but when I'm telling you this, they look like, when I see them, they're as real to me as you are. And so I would sometimes get into arguments with them because sometimes they would decide things that I'm like, this doesn't make any sense. They're like, well, so I'm like, well, sorry, who am I talking to? Are you the superior court? Like, what is the... It's not hubris. It's just, it doesn't make any sense. So why are you asking me to do that? It doesn't make any sense. And very often they would come back and say, okay, yeah, you're right. And sometimes they won't. But to your question about the relationship, what's interesting about that question is that, yes, there is they're not the creators of the code, it seems. Whoever wrote the program, you mean? I've once been shown what's called the full structure. Now, whenever I say something about it, I want to make it super clear. I'm not claiming that I think it necessarily means that's how reality is. But that's what was shown to be under the title, that's how things work. Okay? And what was interesting there is there was a lot of very, to me, arbitrary things. So I was born in Russia. I wasn't born here. If you couldn't already tell by my accent. But when you are born in the Soviet Union, something very interesting happens that I never thought about until I came to America. Here, even if you're secular, either you realize it or not, you are in some relationship to Jesus Christ. Either you're against him, or you for him, or you're agnostic, but it's always about him somehow, because it's in the cultural zeitgeist. That's not part of my software, because I was born in a place, now Russia got a little bit more religious, but back then it was completely secular. These motifs simply didn't exist. It's completely secular. You worship the state, basically. And because of that, I was very surprised to see Jesus Christ as part of the picture. And so if, my scientific mind goes, I was like, well, what would make sense to me is that the function of Jesus Christ is real. So like whatever the checks and balances in reality are, which you would imagine you would need some if anything is possible, somehow there is some kind of a karmic thing going on. 1 second. No, of course. I will absolutely address your point. Yeah, no, I will not forget about you, I promise. There's some kind of a karmic thing going on, and that karmic thing it's simply the nature of things. So it's not so much as like somebody sitting there with like like writing down what you did, or it's just what is the outcome of behaving this way. If your energy is such, that's how the system will automatically treat it. That's what's going to happen, basically. So, and to your question of who wrote the code, it seems that there is this external environment. This is going to get super esoteric, so I'm telling you right away, because it's very arbitrary. But that's what I saw. There was a completely external reality to ours. Has nothing to do with ours. Well, nothing to do, it's a stretch, of course, because obviously they can see through the whole thing. But it's separate. Our world, our multiverse, is part of a 3-system thing. And I don't know what the other 2 are. It wasn't clear to me, but it was like this, and this is your multiverse right here. And then put all that aside. Now there's this other hierarchy here of what I guess you would call gods. And they go all the way up. Here's a kicker, because I get a lot of either oohs or ahs about this. The biblical God is there. And what's interesting is that he's not on the top. He's not on the top. On the top, very surprising to me, because again, as the generalist that I am, I would imagine that the God Almighty would be some kind of a ball of energy, or some kind of a unified state of everything, or some other beautiful esoteric thing we want to say. It's a woman. It's a woman. Don't get ahead of yourself. The other thing that immediately became apparent was that you don't want to mess with her. Everybody were behaving in a way of like, don't. I don't know why that is. I'm not so sure I want to find out right now. But essentially, from what I understand, is that the ultimate being, either it's her or anything beyond that, does not know why everything exists. Nobody in reality knows why everything exists, including the God Almighty. And this is why the simulations are running, is to try and create a heat map of, is there a common denominator that happens in all realities if they unfold into a completely random space that nobody could foresee? Is there anything, logic, phrase, behavior, story civilization tells themselves, no matter how different the circumstances are, is there any one common denominator, one vector that points in the same direction? Because if there is, that's a hint of what's outside of whatever reality is and how it all. And before I answer your question, what I found that I think that main thing they're studying, in the famous words of the architect from the second Matrix, the problem is choice. They don't understand it. Nobody does. We think there's a famous experiment by Benjamin LeBay, we were talking about this yesterday, in which he basically proved that this moment that we think we make a choice is actually not ours. In other words, the scientists that were looking at a screen, reading your brain from the side, there's a very clever way in which they set up this experiment with a running dial, and you have to just press, and your only job is to basically clock when did you think you made the choice to choose this or that, or press the button, and it basically tells them, and they know up to, I don't remember the exact numbers, but I think it's something crazy. I think it's up to 6 seconds before you make the decision. So they already know when you're going to make the decision. So it's definitely not you making the decision. But what's interesting is that it seems like it's nowhere in the brain either. And it's nowhere in reality either. It's like the hole in the donut. That zig versus zag seems to be operating from somewhere outside of reality. And the ultimate choice, the fractal version of choice, does this mean we're, I don't know, is this like the red light in the comedy club? The ultimate choice is reality's choice to be versus not to be. It's the ultimate wiggle, basically. So if you, it's like something mundane. You're washing the dishes, okay? It's easy to imagine because it's like the water from the water, right? And then you have 30 minutes to decide. I'm either going to go to the gym or I'm going to go to the store to buy groceries. Let's say there was no Uber Eats before Uber Eats. So you're like, okay, you have all these competing ideas. It's like, we don't have enough food in the fridge, but didn't work out in like a week. I have a date tonight. I want to look good, so maybe I go work out. Yeah, but then we have nothing to. So all these decisions, right? Okay. So now you have all these. There's an ocean of data that you're handling, right? And then the more the time closes in, you kind of eliminate options. And then if you look really closely at that instance of decision, right? It's not really that whatever you felt yourself as the conscious being making the decision. It's more like you fell asleep and now woke up into a world in which one of them would happen. It's like you fell asleep for a nanosecond and then now if I'm going to ask you why you make that choice, you're going to have a story. You're going to backfill. You're going to tell me, because A, B, and C. But if you look really close, the reason I say fall asleep is because we never remember falling asleep. We only remember waking up. So it's almost like your brain went into like a no conscious, and now this will happen. And now you have a story about why you think it's going to happen. But whatever you feel yourself to be never made that choice. That's what I mean.